أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي رب زدني علما Ameen. Today we are going to start with this new surah, surah number 4, Surah An-Nisa, that is the women. This surah is a Madani surah. I'd like to explain here that when we say Madani, it does not necessarily mean that the surah was revealed in Medina, but it means that it is possible, very much possible, that it was revealed in Medina, but it also means that it was revealed after the migration of the Prophet to Medina. Because there are some surahs and ayats which were revealed at the time of the conquest of Makkah. They were revealed in Makkah, but they are also called the Madani surahs because they were revealed after the migration. So anyway, this is a proper Madani surah. By proper, I mean it was revealed in Medina. Mainly, most of it was revealed in 4 Hijri, after the Battle of Uhud. As the name suggests, it deals very largely with the new rights and privileges being given to women. This established, for the first time in the history of the world, the fact that a woman is an individual with legal and social rights. She was given the right to inherit and possess property and was declared to be an heir to her parents, her husband, her children, and siblings. She was given the right to be a witness acceptable to the law and to have an opinion, especially in matters of choosing a husband and her faith. It was also established that she is a spiritual person with a soul capable of attaining great spiritual heights. Now, this surah was revealed at a time when in the whole world, women did not have any rights at all. And the status of women was such that in some religions and in some countries, the widow would be burnt alive with the husband's funeral pyre. And in other places, she was considered to be the root cause of all evil. And philosophers kept debating whether she was a human being or not. And she had no legal or social rights and no opinion, especially in choosing a life partner. And of course, she could not inherit any kind of property. So this surah brings about very long-term reforms which are aimed at making the family life more pleasant by establishing clear rules and laws. In this surah, we also come across the problem of polygamy. I'm calling it the problem. Well, maybe it's not a problem for some people. But this is, according to my understanding, polygamy is allowed conditionally. There are certain conditions attached to it, and it is not, the man is not as free as some people might like to think, to take as many wives as he likes, of course, under 4. Then the surah also deals with the development of a person's character, and in this it is also made clear that obedience to the Prophet ﷺ is unconditional. The importance of the family is also emphasized here by defining mutual rights, that men have a right over women and women have a right over men. And men have been enjoined to treat women with consideration, and concern is shown about the possibility of our rights being usurped. The rules and proportions of inheritance are defined in great detail. In the holy wars after migration, the believers encountered a great loss of life, especially in Uhud. Therefore, the problem of orphans is dealt with also in relation to polygamy, which is legalized conditionally, as I just said. And of course, throughout the Quran, emphasis is being placed on the building on an individual's moral character together and would gradually devour it. And according to Hazrat Aisha, there is a hadith which says sometimes the guardians would marry orphans with wealth. I think we'll come to this in the next next verse when I read that. وإن خفتم ألا تقسطوا في اليتامى فانكحوا ما طاب لكم من النساء مثنى وثلاث ورباع فإن خفتم ألا تعدلوا فواحدة أو ما ملكت أيمانكم ذلك أدنى ألا تعولوا. And if you fear that you will not be able to do justice to the orphans, then marry the females of your choice, 2 or 3 or 4. But if you fear that you will not be able to treat them equally, then marry only one or a captive. This is better than being partial. So, as I was just reading that hadith, it says that sometimes the guardians, after a person died and he left behind him female orphans as well, then these guardians would marry the orphans with wealth and good looks, but would not give their proper dower and other rights. And therefore, since they were not giving the proper rights to those orphans as their wives after having married them, therefore they are being told to marry other women instead of these orphans if they were not going to give them their rights, because they felt that they had no one to stand up for them. So here it says, then marry the females of your choice, 2 or 3 or 4. Now, in today's world, this question is always coming up as to why so many wives have been allowed to a single man. But at that time, there was really no limit on the number of wives. So here, the limit is being set. Men are being restricted from marrying not more than 4. Besides this, mostly in the wars, it was the men who had given up their lives, and therefore the number of the women somehow, became more than the number of men. And this choice or facility or privilege or whatever you want to call it was given to men because the women had to be given homes and protection. And if you look at the life of the Prophet, except for Hazrat Aisha, all his wives were either widows. They were all widows, and maybe one of them was a divorcee. So this privilege is conditional, as we will see as we go on. But if you fear that you will not be able to treat them equally, then marry only one or a captive. This is better than being partial. So what we have seen in this world is that when people take a second wife, they often become partial to their new wife, mostly younger wife, and then they forget about the first one. But here the condition is being set to treat them equally. And if you cannot treat them equally, then only marry one or a captive. Now, here another point comes up that sometimes people say that the captives did not have to be, that the men did not have to marry the captives or the female slaves or another point I'd like to make clear is that you couldn't just catch any woman and make her a slave, but those women who came to the battlefield of their own choice and they were left behind, these are the women who became the captives. And sometimes they were ransomed and sometimes they were not. So, but these captives also had to be married. Sometimes, you get the impression that the captives could be kept with the men. The men could use them in any way they liked without marrying them. But here it becomes clear that they had to marry them. So these are some of the conditions, and as we go along, we'll come across some more conditions. وَآتُوا النِّسَاءَ صَدُقَاتِهِنَّ نِهْلَةً فَإِن تِبْنَ لَكُمْ عَنْ شَيْءٍ مِّنْهُ نَفْسًا فَكُلُوا هَنِيًّا مَرِيًّا. Give to the women their agreed dowers. Now, people often confuse the words dower and dowry. Dower is the mahr which the husband gives to the wife at the time of the nikah. And dowry is the another word for it, which is also an Arabic word, is jahiz, which is given by the girl's family, by the bride's family to the bride. So give to the women their agreed dowers willingly without expecting any return. In some cultures, they there is a condition in the nikah form that you can either give the meher or the dower at that very moment or at the time of the nikah, or you can defer it. If somebody has, says that I'll be receiving my payment from somewhere in 6 months or a year, I'll give it then. So that can be noted down, and then he has to fulfill that agreement. But sometimes people just say, I'd like to defer it, and that deferring is done for forever and ever, and they just forget about the marriage. This is not the right thing to do. Even the Prophet has been told, "O Prophet, those women are legal for you to whom you pay their dowers." So the dower is an extremely essential item in the nikah. Then also this question of why 2, 3, or 4 marriages. This is actually a kind of a controlling condition which to control the behavior of people in society. In this way, instead of developing into a promiscuous society, that woman who might have become a mistress is given a home and a name, and her children are also taken care of, and she is also the children are also given a name. And according to the rules and laws provided, I'm not saying that everyone carries them out. Now, in some countries where this rule is not followed, sometimes the woman doesn't even really remember whose child this one is and whose child this one is. So all these things, they destroy the structure of the home and the family and the security that the children receive in a home and a family. That is one of the reasons why they have been given this privilege to take 2 or 3 or 4. But it must be remembered that this is conditional. Then it's this Surah 4, ayat number 4 says, if they forego a portion of it, that is of the dower, on their own, then you are allowed to enjoy it fully. Now, if a woman doesn't need that money from the money or whatever she was given in the dower by the husband, if she doesn't need it or she doesn't want it and she returns it to the husband willingly, not forced to do it, then the husband is allowed to receive it. Now, this problem to justice to the orphans, as we know that in the Battle of Uhud, 70 out of the total of 700 able-bodied men were martyred. And the problem of widows and orphans reached enormous proportions. But later in verse number 127 in Surah An-Nisa, mention is made of orphan women. Normally, when we talk of orphans, we understand that these orphans are children. But in 129, verse number 129, mention is made of orphan women. Sorry, not 129, 127. And the word for orphan used is yatama, which is used even for women who do not have a husband or have lost their husband either by death or divorce. So yatama does not only mean a female orphan child, but it also means a woman who does not have a husband or one who has lost a husband either by his death or by divorce. So one can easily conclude that polygamy was permitted to provide homes to the yatama of marriageable age. And then later on, the Quran also says, howsoever you may try, you will never be able to treat your wives equally. This is verse number 129 of Surah An-Nisa. And when read in conjunction with this present verse number 3, that you are being allowed to marry so many wives, if you treat them equally, and later it is said, but you will never be able to treat them equally. From this, some people have concluded that this is actually, taking away that right to have multiple wives. Also, some people have concluded that monogamy is the ideal, while polygamy is a kind of a safety valve which is to be used under special conditions, such as providing homes to the yatama. So there are so many points to be considered in this polygamy problem, which people don't think about. Okay, I think we have mostly covered this part of it. This little word here, the end of verse number 3. Zalika adna Allah ta'ulu. This word ta'ulu has been explained by Hazrat Ibn Abbas as being partial, and Imam Shafi explained it as if you have many wives, then you're going to be burdened with many children whom you might not be able to support. And this is said, see, I'll read out the English here. If you fear that you will not be able to treat them equally, then marry only one or a captive. This is better than being partial. For partial, the word here, used here is ta'ulu. So that means if you don't want to be burdened by too many children whom you cannot support, or if you're afraid that you're going to be partial, then it's better that you take only one wife. وَلَا تُؤْتُوا السُّفَهَاءَ أَمْوَالَكُمُ الَّتِي جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ قِيَامًا وَارْزُقُوهُمْ فِيهَا وَاكْسُوهُمْ وَقُولُوا لَهُمْ قَوْلًا مَعْرُوفًا. Now this is continuing with the problem of the orphans. Do not give the immature orphans the property which God has placed in your trust, making it a support for you. Support them from it, feeding and clothing them, and speaking to them in kindness. So being kind to orphans and taking care of them is one of the biggest, best good deeds that one can think about. وَابْتَلُوا الْيَتَامَى حَتَّى إِذَا بَلَغُوا النِّكَاحَ فَإِنْ آنَسْتُم مِّنْهُمْ رُشْدًا فَادْفَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ أَمْوَالَهُمْ وَلَا تَأْكُلُوهَا إِسْرَافًا وَبِدَارًا أَنْ يَكْبَرُوا وَمَنْ كَانَ غَنِيًّا فَلْيَسْتَعْفِفْ وَمَنْ كَانَ فَقِيرًا فَلْيَأْكُلْ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ فَإِذَا دَفَعْتُمْ إِلَيْهِمْ أَمْوَالَهُمْ فَأَشْهِدُوا عَلَيْهِمْ وَكَفَى بِاللَّهِ حَسِيبًا. And keep testing the orphans. How do you test the orphans? You give small amounts. When they start growing up, then you keep giving them small amounts and see how they are going to spend it and how careful they are with whatever they're doing, if they're just being, frivolous, or if they have acquired some sense. And also another way of testing them is to take their opinion in serious matters in order to judge them. So keep testing the orphans until they reach adulthood. When you find in them mature judgment, then return to them their property. And do not spend wastefully and in haste, fearing that they will soon grow up. This has been done by many people, where the uncles because the children are minor, they're not capable of taking care of themselves. They get hold of all the property, the wealth, and then they never think of returning it. All they do is just let them, eat and dress well and go to school maybe. So here they're being told not to spend wastefully and in haste, fearing that they will soon grow up and demand their share back. He, that is the guardian who is prosperous, should refrain from spending the orphan's property on himself, and the guardian who is poor should spend only a reasonable amount. When you return their property to them, to make witnesses, for God is enough as the reckoner. Now, for the person who is being allowed, who is not so well off, is allowed to take some money from the business of the orphan, but he should only take as much as necessary, or he should take what he rightfully thinks are his wages, and just take the wages and not anything else. And then it is said, when you return their property to them, make witnesses, for God is enough as reckoner. Now, we had spoken about witnesses earlier when it was said at the end of towards the end of Surah Al-Baqarah, that make witnesses, one man and two women. But at that time, if you remember, I had said that there are 8 places in the Quran in which witnessing is mentioned, and this is another one of them, make witnesses. But you see here, no mention is made of man or woman. Any witness that is available, that you can trust, make them a witness. And also, This is my personal opinion, that the witness should not be too old, because the children are very young and you don't know when there'll be a dispute about their property. So the person who is a witness should be a little younger, not that old. للرجال نصيب مما ترك الوالدان والأقربون وللنساء نصيب مما ترك الوالدان والأقربون مما قل منه أو كثر نصيبا مفروضا. So for the men is a share of what the parents and close relatives leave behind. For the women is a share of what the parents and close relatives have left behind, whether it be much or little, the share is fixed. See, before this, there was no rule about dividing the inheritance, the taraka. And it was just, a matter of person's will, that he could just give it away to anybody he liked. But here in the Quran, the share of every heir is fixed. The will, there is also mention of the will, the wasiya, but that is restricted to 1/3 of the property. If a person wants to give something to a non-heir or to a cause, then he has a right to give only 1/3 of his property. The rest will have to be divided according to the Sharia. Before these rules came in, everywhere in the world, the property was given to people who were capable, able-bodied, who were capable of fighting in wars, whether it was in the East or the West, whichever country it was. That was a kind of a criterion, that able-bodied men who will be able to take part in wars, they should be allowed to inherit whatever property has been left behind. One point I forgot to mention here about the guardian who was poor and who was taking something to spend on himself from the property of the orphan. It has been suggested that the best thing to do is to consider it a qarz-e hasana, which means that you are taking a loan and you will return it whenever you are able to return it. And this was the belief of Hazrat Umar Farooq, Hazrat Umar, the Khalifa. Now, before Islam, the women and children mostly did not get a share in their property because they, as I said, they were not able to participate in wars. And in the British aristocracy, the eldest son was the main heir. Even the other sons, who took part in wars, they did not get anything. Just the eldest son became the heir to the honor or the name. In Hinduism as well, there was, no woman had any share. And the will, now I'm talking about the will. If you are going to write a will, that will be only about 1/3 of your property, but also it is based on the relationship, the closeness of the relationship, the need, and also so that, all this, the way that has been divided, the Sharia law, it sees to it that the property is not accumulated or hoarded in a few hands, that everybody gets his rightful share. If a person says that I disown so and so, if a person is angry with his son and he says, I disown my third son because he did this, that, and the other, and I'm not going to let him have anything from my property, after his death, that son can challenge the will. So in Islam, if the will is not following Sharia, then that will can be challenged. Yusikumullahu fi auladikum lizzakari mislu hizzil unsayain. Fa in kunna nisan fawqas nataini falahunna sulusa ma taraka. Wa in kanat wahidatan falahan nisf. وَلِأَبَوَيْهِ لِكُلِّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمُ السُّدُسُ مِمَّا تَرَكَ إِنْ كَانَ لَهُ وَلَدٌ فَإِنْ لَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ وَلَدٌ وَوَرِثَهُ أَبَوَاهُ فَلِأُمِّهِ الثُّلُثُ فَإِنْ كَانَ لَهُ إِخْوَةٌ فَلِأُمِّهِ السُّدُسُ مِنْ بَعْدِ وَصِيَّةٍ يُوصِي بِهَا أَوْ دَيْنٍ آبَاؤُكُمْ وَأَبْنَاؤُكُمْ لا تدرون أيهم أقرب لكم نفعا Faridatan min Allah, inna Allah kana aliman hakima. God commands you about your children. The share of the male is equal to that of two females. So now this is also a point where the modernists are not happy. They say, why is the woman given only half the share of the man? The male is given double of what the female is given. This is because the female has no responsibilities. For example, if there was a rich woman and she had a husband who was not so rich, the husband would not be able to challenge that woman in a court of law and say she has so much money and she doesn't spend in the house. No, she doesn't have to spend in the house. But normally she would, but she doesn't have to. But if a husband didn't spend the right amount on his wife and children and the household, that woman could go to court and say, he is not supporting us. So you see, the woman does not have any responsibility, any legal responsibility. There might be a moral responsibility, or she might want to do it herself. So God commands you that you have to give 2 parts to the male heir and 1 to the female. And I have seen this in our families that, all the responsibility is on the males, and they just sort of, because of the culture, they automatically know that they have to support the females, so much so that not only do they support their real sisters, but they also support their cousins sometimes and their aunts and so on. But if there are only females, more than 2, for them is 2/3 of the inheritance. That means if that person who has died has no son and he has female daughter, just has daughters, more than 2, then 2/3 of that inheritance will go to the daughters, and the rest will go to the male heirs. It might be the uncle or whoever. See, there is this question of the will. So what if the parents want to make a will and say that they want to give this property to their daughters? Or the father says, it's my property, I want to give it to my daughters. That he can do when he is still alive. He will have to transfer it in the name of his daughters while he is still alive. But after his death, the Sharia applies. After his death, it can be challenged. The 1/3, as we just discussed, the will to 1/3 cannot be will to an heir. You cannot say, okay, I have 3 daughters and my eldest daughter was so good to me, she took care of me, so I want to will an extra 1/3 to her. No, you can't do that. You cannot will that 1/3 of your property to one of the heirs. You can will it to a non-heir or to any cause that you want to give it to. Of course, if you want to change the inheritance, you would have to get the heirs to agree to it. Supposing somebody has 3 daughters and one of the daughters has some problems or is not so well off, then the other 2 daughters would have to be consulted, and if they agreed to give more to one of them, then it's okay. And if there is only one female child, for her is half. So if there is only one child and that is a female, then for her is only half the inheritance and the other half goes to the male heirs. 1/6 of the inheritance is for each of the parents in case the deceased has children. And in case the deceased has no children and the parents are the only heirs, then the mother inherits 1/3. If the deceased has siblings, then for the mother is 1/6 after the execution of the will and payment of debts. This phrase is repeated again and again, that the inheritance has to be divided only after the execution of the will and the payment of debts. If that person is in debt, then the first thing one has to do is to pay his debts. In fact, in some cultures and some people, at the time of the funeral prayer, they stand up and say, is there anyone who, owes this person something, or does this person owe anything to anybody? They announce this, and then the first thing that has to be taken care of is the debt. Now the debt becomes the responsibility of the heirs. They have to take it out from their property, which they thought was their inheritance, and they have to pay the debt. And also, if a man has not paid at the time of the nikah, if the man who has now died, he had not paid the mahar or the dower at the time of his nikah, then at the time of his death, his heirs will have to give it to his wife, unless, of course, if she forgives it or forgoes it. It has happened, the will has to be taken out first. See, it says after. If the deceased has siblings, then for the mother is 1/6 after the execution of the will and the payment of the debts. So, payment of debt is 1/3 is 33 1/3%. 1/3 comes to 33 and 1/3%. If somebody has no will, then you just forget about it. Then there's no question of a will. Only the heir should try to find out if there are some people who owe. To whom this person who's died, if he owed something to them. Actually, my husband died in Abu Dhabi and we were living here and we were not aware of all his circumstances and, whatever he was doing. But we went there and we tried to find out from the people who were working with him or who knew him if there was anybody to whom my husband owed anything, like in his official payments or work or whatever. And we tried as much as possible to settle that first before we could do anything else. All right, and then the same verse goes on, number 11 verse, you are not aware as to who is more useful to you, your parents or your children. So, you should not question the ratio of this division between your parents and your children, because your parents have already spent most of their life and they are towards the end of their lives, and they they don't need so many things, but the children might be still studying, or they might need to get married, or they might be bringing up their children, and whatever it is, the younger people have more needs. So that is why they're given a bigger share. So here it is said that you are not to question this, because God knows who needs more, who has more use for your inheritance. This has been made incumbent on you by God. Indeed, God is the ever-knowing, the ever-wise. So the division of the property, of the inheritance, of the taraka, this has not to be changed at all. Like I knew somebody who had 6 sons and 2 daughters, and he made a will and he didn't tell anybody about it, and he kept it in, it was in safekeeping. And after his death, it was found that he had given all his 6 sons all that was due to them. Plus, he said 1/3, I want to give him more, one of my sons more, because he was not able to study as much as the others did, because I wanted him to join a certain business, and he suffered because of me. So I want to give him an extra share. But the heirs, most of the heirs, did not agree with this. They challenged it. So in the end, that 1/3 was not given to that son. Only one of the brothers decided to give him a part of his share, and that was the end of it. So you see, the debt is the first thing that you attend to, and then the second thing is the will, and then whatever is left is to be divided according to this ratio. Of course, it's not easy to understand all these, divisions. So I would suggest that anyone who has to do this should consult a professional, whether it is a professional lawyer who deals with inheritance or a mufti who knows all about this, because it can become a bit difficult to understand at times. وَلَكُمْ نِصْفُ مَا تَرَكَ أَزْوَاجُكُمْ إِنْ لَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُنَّ وَلَدٌ فَإِنْ كَانَ لَهُنَّ وَلَدٌ فَلَكُمُ الرُّبُعُ مِمَّا تَرَكْنَا مِنْ بَعْدِ وَصِيَّةٍ يُوصِينَ بِهَا أَوْ دَيْنٍ. See, the word wasiyat is coming again and again. Wasiyat is the will. Wallah. And then is the loan or the debt. وَلَهُنَّ الرُّبُعُ مِمَّا تَرَكْتُمْ إِنْ لَمْ يَكُنْ لَكُمْ وَلَدٌ. فَإِنْ كَانَ لَكُمْ وَلَدٌ فَلَهُنَّ الثُّمُنُ مِمَّا تَرَكْتُم مِّن بَعْدِ وَصِيَّةٍ تُوصُونَ بِهَا أَوْ دَيْنٍ. See, again and again, these two words are repeated. وَإِنْ كَانَ رَجُلٌ يُورِثُ كَلَالَةً وَامْرَأَةٌ وَلَهُ أَخٌ أَوْ أُخْتٌ فَلِكُلِّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا السُّدُسُ وَإِنْ كَانُوا أَكْثَرَ مِنْ ذَلِكَ فَهُمْ شُرَكَاءُ فِي الثُّلُثِ مِنْ بَعْدِ وَصِيَّةٍ يُوصِي بِهَا أَوْ دَيْنٍ غَيْرَ مُضَارٍّ وَصِيَّةً مِنَ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ حَكِيمٌ. So for you is half for what your wives leave behind. So if the wife dies first and the husband is left behind, then the husband gets half of what she leaves behind if they do not have any children. If they have children, then for you is 1/4 of what they leave behind after the execution of the will and the payment of debts. So again, you see the children are getting a greater share because they need it more. For them, your wives is 1/4 of what you leave behind in case you do not have any children. So if the man dies first and he doesn't have any children, they do not have any children, then the wife is going to get 1/4 of what he leaves behind. But if you have children, for them is, for the wife that is 1/8 of what you leave behind after the execution of the will and payment of debts. And if the deceased is childless, whether a man or a woman, and has a brother or a sister, then for each of them is 1/6. Now this is a bit, a bit difficult to really understand and to remember. And if the siblings are more than one, then they share in 1/3 of the execution of the will and the payment of debts without any prejudice. This is the command of God. God is the ever-knowing, the patiently dignified. Actually, I've left out the part in which, you sort of, it is explained that even the brothers, when it says if they have brothers or sisters, and in that it says, there are special terms for the brothers who have the same parents, same father, same mother. Then there is the brothers who have the same father but different mothers. Then there are the brothers who have the same mother but different fathers, and so on. So these terms are a bit difficult to follow, and I don't think we need to understand all that. So I've left that part out. But we must remember that the debt comes first, then the will comes second, and then the shares. Tilka hududullah wa man yuti Allah wa rasulahu yudkhilhu jannatin tajri min tahtiha al-anharu khalidina fiha wa zalikal fawzul azim. These are the limits set by God. The one who obeys God and His Prophet will be admitted into gardens with rivers flowing by and will abide in it forever. This will be the great success. So, after giving us all these different divisions and priorities and all that, then we are being told that anyone who takes care to follow these rules and laws, he will be admitted into gardens, that is, into heaven, into Jannah. وَمَنْ يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَيَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَهُ يُدْخِلْهُ نَارًا خَالِدًا فِيهَا وَلَهُ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. The one who disobeys God and His Prophet and crosses His limits will be admitted into the fire and will abide there forever. For him is a disgraceful punishment. So anyone who breaks these rules and laws of inheritance will, of course, anyone who disobeys God and His Prophet, he has crossed the limit and he'll be admitted into the fire. God will not be pleased with him. وَاللَّاتِي يَأْتِينَ الْفَاحِشَةَ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ فَاسْتَشْهِدُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ أَرْبَعَةً مِنْكُمْ فَإِنْ شَهِدُوا فَأَمْسِكُوهُنَّ فِي الْبُيُوتِ حَتَّى يَتَوَفَّاهُنَّ الْمَوْتُ أَوْ يَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ لَهُنَّ سَبِيلًا. Now this is another topic. As for those females who commit obscenity, demand from the accuser 4 witnesses from among you. If the witnesses, now you see, in this case, what kind of witnesses will they be? They will be eyewitnesses. So this is the 3rd time we are coming across the concept of witnessing. So if somebody accuses a woman of obscenity And of course, obscenity not of a minor kind, but of the uh, extreme kind, or you might say accusing a woman of zina. Then the one who is accusing that woman will have to bring four witnesses who will have to testify and say that we saw the act with our own eyes. They will have to be eyewitnesses. And if these four witnesses testify at the same time, they were there at the same time, then retain them, that is, the one who is accused, the guilty person or the woman, then retain them in their houses until death or until God shows them another way. So you see, it's not a small thing, it's not a minor thing to accuse somebody of obscenity. And it's a very serious matter. And you will find that later on we'll learn this, that if a person accuses a woman of obscenity and cannot bring four witnesses, then that person will have to suffer almost the same punishment that was to be given to the accused. See, there's nothing about starving here. It's just that she's not allowed to go out. If she's being obscene, if she's roaming around and doing all kinds of wrong things, then it's like putting her in jail. Now, in jail, you do serve them food, even though it's not the best food in the world, but you don't let them starve. In fact, the word, for one thing, you think that obscenity is not the right word to use because in Arabic it says fahishata, fahashi. This word means obscenity. That means you can't replace this word with zina or anything else, but it does, from the tafsirs and all, you learn from the commentaries that it does mean the just going to the extreme and committing zina. Now, in this also one point is that retain them in their houses until death. It means they're not supposed to go out for the rest of their lives. That means they're in jail. Or until God shows them. In fact, in one of the tafsirs, it says put them in jail. And here it says until God shows them another way. That means that an abrogation of this verse is being predicted, that God will show them another way. God will reveal another way of punishing them or restraining them. So the abrogation of the verse is being predicted. And you will find when we come to Surah An-Nur that in Surah An-Nur the exact punishment is given for the adulterer and the adulteress. And according to some commentators, this is about married women. So if you're already married and still you are committing this crime, then, or sin, whatever you want to call it, then you need to be punished. And the very next verse is about men who commit this crime or the sin. So, Lina, it's not that the men are not being controlled or not being punished. But as you said, we can do this next time, inshallah. Yes, I admit today's lesson was a bit difficult, but this is the challenge, not to give it one's own interpretation, but to try to understand it the way it should be understood. Some people have to leave, so it's all right. We'll just do the dua and pray for them as well, for those who have left. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanatan wa fil akhirati hasanatan wa qina azaban nar. وأدخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار يا عزيز يا غفار يا رب العالمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين ثم آمين. All right, until next time, thank you very much for joining us, and inshallah we'll see you next time. Allah Hafiz.